He sat there with his heart pounding against his chest, staring down at the wrinkled bills folded neatly inside his wallet. $70. That was all he had to his name for this night. $70 to prove to a woman he'd never met before that he was worthy of a second chance at happiness. The dim restaurant lights flickered across his nervous face, while his rough hands, calloused from years of hard labor, trembled against the menu. At the next table, someone was watching. Quietly, carefully, studying every move he made. But here's the part nobody expected. This watchful stranger wasn't just another diner. This was someone with power, with resources, someone whose attention could change a man's life forever. Yet the single father sitting there, drowning in nerves, had no idea that his every word, every anxious glance, was being measured by eyes far sharper than he could imagine. Before the night was over, something would happen at that table that would test kindness, pride, and the very meaning of dignity. And the moment it did, everyone in that restaurant froze. But what exactly did the CEO at the next table notice, and why did it leave the entire room silent? Stay with me, because the truth is only just beginning to unfold. And trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. If you're the kind of person who believes in second chances, in kindness, in life turning around when you least expect it, hit subscribe right now. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you only had $70 to prove your worth? Because his story is about to shake you. Now let's step back to where it all began. His name was Marcus, a 35-year-old single dad raising his little girl, Destiny, all on his own. Destiny was only 8, bright-eyed and full of questions that Marcus sometimes struggled to answer. Her mother had walked out when she was just a toddler, leaving Marcus holding the pieces of a life he had never planned for. He worked double shifts at a car repair shop just outside the city, grease always staining his fingernails no matter how hard he scrubbed. Nights were long, mornings came too early, but every sacrifice was for Destiny. She was his reason for dragging himself out of bed when his body begged him to stay down. But deep inside, Marcus was lonely. Years had passed since he had gone on a real date. He'd buried his heart under the weight of fatherhood and survival. That was until his friend convinced him to try something he'd laughed off for years: online dating. And that's how he found himself here, tonight, staring at the clock as he waited for a woman he'd never seen in real life. Her name was Elise. They had exchanged messages for weeks, her words painting a picture of someone kind, intelligent, and gentle. She knew he was a single dad, knew money was tight, and yet still agreed to meet him. Marcus wanted this to go well, but the truth was, he only had $70 left after paying rent and covering school supplies for Destiny. $70 for dinner, drinks, maybe even dessert if things went better than he hoped. He tried not to think about the humiliation if the bill ran higher. He tried not to think about the way his chest tightened every time the waiter walked by. He tried not to think about what it would mean if tonight went wrong. And then she walked in. Elise was more beautiful than her pictures, her soft curls falling across her shoulders, her smile disarming and warm. She slid into the seat across from him, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt the air in his lungs expand with hope. Their conversation started well. Laughter came easier than he expected. She asked about Destiny, and he spoke with pride. For a moment, he forgot about the weight in his wallet. For a moment, he felt like a man again, not just a struggling father. But then the waiter came, and that's when Marcus's world began to tilt. The menu prices were higher than he expected, much higher. He tried to keep his face calm, his smile steady, but inside his stomach twisted. Elise didn't notice at first. She was talking about her job, her passion for teaching kids, but Marcus was already calculating in his head. If she ordered wine, if she ordered an appetizer, what would be left for the main course? He looked at the clock again. His hand trembled as he set down the menu. He told himself he'd figure it out somehow. He always did. But just 2 tables over, a pair of eyes had locked onto him, watching, judging, and silently waiting for the right moment. The night pressed on. Elise ordered pasta. Marcus went for the cheapest dish he could find. He excused himself to the restroom, standing over the sink with his face buried in his hands. His reflection stared back at him, tired, worn, but not broken. He had come this far. He couldn't let $70 rob him of the chance to feel human again. He returned to the table, forcing a smile, forcing laughter. Elise was kind, but Marcus couldn't shake the fear that sooner or later the truth would come crashing down when the check arrived. And then it happened. The moment that changed everything. The waiter approached. Slowly. Carefully. The little black folder in hand. Marcus felt his pulse slam against his ribs. He could see the numbers before they were even revealed. Elise smiled, still unaware. But Marcus knew, if that bill landed in front of him, it could mean humiliation unlike anything he'd faced in years. The waiter stopped, looked down at Marcus, and then something unexpected happened that froze the entire restaurant, because the CEO at the next table had just made his move, and what he did left Marcus speechless. The entire restaurant seemed to pause as the waiter stood frozen between two tables. In one hand was the check Marcus feared, and in the other, the gaze of a man whose presence seemed too powerful to ignore. The CEO, though Marcus had no idea who he was, leaned forward ever so slightly, a quiet signal, a small gesture that shifted everything in that moment. Marcus's eyes flicked upward. For a split second he thought he had imagined it. But no, the man at the next table, dressed in a crisp suit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent, was looking straight at him. Not with pity, not with scorn, but with recognition. The waiter hesitated, glanced at the suited man, then back at Marcus, unsure of where to place the black folder. Marcus felt his palms grow wet. Elise looked confused. The air seemed heavy, waiting for someone, anyone, to speak. And then the CEO simply nodded. A silent command, a wordless interruption. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He didn't understand. Why was this man involving himself? Why was he looking at Marcus as if he already knew the weight of those $70 stuffed inside a worn wallet? But before anything more could unfold, Marcus forced a polite smile and reached for the folder himself. He wouldn't let some stranger step into his struggle. Pride burned in his chest. Dignity, fragile but still alive, made his hand stretch out first. The CEO leaned back, his expression unreadable. For now. Elise tilted her head. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. Marcus nodded, though his pulse was a drum in his ears. "Yeah, everything's fine," he lied. He slid the folder closer, his thumb shaking as he opened it. Inside, the numbers glared at him like a cruel joke. The total sat there, mocking him. His stomach dropped, his mind raced. He tried to mask it with a smile, but Elise saw the way his eyes darkened. She frowned. "Marcus?" But Marcus couldn't answer. Not yet. And here's where you need to pause for a second, because if you were in Marcus's shoes, what would you do? Would you admit the truth? Would you pray the ground opened and swallowed you whole? Or would you try to bluff your way through, hoping the storm would pass? Comment below, because I want to hear how you'd handle this moment. Marcus stared at the bill again. He could pay it, yes, but the money left over would barely cover groceries for the rest of the week. Destiny's lunchbox, the bills, the gas tank. It would all have to suffer just for one night of pretending. The thought of his daughter's face flashed before him. Destiny's laughter when he packed her favorite peanut butter sandwich. Her little arms wrapping around his neck when he tucked her in. Her trust in him, the only parent she had left. His eyes watered, though he blinked it away quickly. Men weren't supposed to cry in public, but what Marcus didn't notice was that the CEO hadn't stopped watching. Every flicker of pain on Marcus's face, every tremor in his hands, it was all being recorded silently. Elise, still confused, reached across the table, her fingers brushing his knuckles. "Marcus," she whispered, "you don't have to pretend with me." He smiled faintly, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'm fine, really." But he wasn't. The waiter lingered nearby, shifting uneasily, waiting for a card or cash. The restaurant around them buzzed with life, glasses clinking, conversations flowing, but Marcus felt like the world had shrunk to this one table, this one bill, this one moment that could break him. He reached slowly into his wallet, pulling out the folded bills. Each one looked smaller than he remembered, like they were shrinking in his hands. $70. His entire night, his entire pride, his entire gamble, right there in green paper. And then it happened. The CEO lifted his hand, not loud, not dramatic, but firm enough to stop the waiter in his tracks. "Bring it here," he said quietly. The waiter froze, torn between Marcus and the man in the suit. Elise's eyes widened. Marcus's heart slammed into his ribs. The CEO repeated, his voice calm but commanding, "Bring it here." The black folder began to move, sliding out of Marcus's reach. Marcus's hand clenched around his money. His face flushed hot. His pride roared inside him. And in that instant, Marcus made a choice that would shock everyone at that table. Marcus's hand froze on the table, the thin stack of bills pressed so tightly in his grip that the edges bent. His pride was screaming at him, louder than the chatter of diners, louder than the clinking glasses and soft music. In that moment, he knew one thing for certain. He would not let another man, stranger or not, pay for his dignity. The black folder began to slide away, but Marcus reached out and snapped it back toward him. His voice was steady, but his chest was on fire. "I've got this," he said firmly. The waiter hesitated, caught in the crossfire of authority between Marcus and the CEO. Elise sat back in her chair, startled, her wide eyes darting between the two men. The CEO didn't move, didn't raise his voice. He just studied Marcus, silent, unreadable, almost as if he was testing him. Marcus pulled out the crumpled bills, straightening them one by one with trembling fingers. He slid them into the folder, his throat dry, his pride clinging to every single dollar. Elise leaned forward, her voice soft but sharp with concern. "Marcus, you don't have to prove anything to me. You really don't." But Marcus shook his head. "Yes, I do." For a brief moment, silence hung heavy over the table. The waiter finally picked up the folder, glancing nervously at the CEO, then scurrying away. Marcus sat back, his heart pounding. His hands were empty now, his wallet thin, his future thinner, but his pride was still intact. He had fought to hold on to it. He had chosen to bear the cost, no matter how heavy. Elise's eyes softened. "You're a good man, Marcus, but you don't have to carry everything alone." Her words cut deep, because Marcus knew she was right. Still, what choice did he have? Since Destiny's mother left, it had been him against the world. If he fell, no one else would be there to pick up the pieces. And here's where I want to ask you something, straight to you listening right now. If you were Marcus, would you have done the same? Or would you have let the stranger step in? Drop your answer in the comments, because this moment reveals more about you than you think. The minutes ticked by, the tension easing just slightly as Elise shifted the conversation back to lighter topics. She told him about her classroom, the way kids sometimes taught her more about life than books ever could. Marcus laughed, genuinely this time, though the ache in his chest remained. But across the room, the CEO was still watching, still listening, still waiting. And then, just when Marcus thought the night was finally settling down, something happened that none of them expected. The waiter returned, this time with more than just a receipt. He bent down, whispered something into Marcus's ear, and slid a small folded card onto the table. Marcus opened it slowly. His eyes widened. His breath caught. The words written inside made his entire body go still. He looked up sharply, his gaze locking on the CEO at the next table. And in that instant, Marcus realized, this night wasn't over. Not even close. The diner was no longer just a diner. It had transformed into a silent courtroom. Every pair of eyes, from the elderly couple by the window to the teenage busboy nervously clutching a tray, was fixed on the officers. The humiliation of the black man had shaken the room into stillness, as though time itself was waiting for a verdict. The officers still didn't know. They had no idea that the man they were shoving and mocking was not just an ordinary diner patron, but the father of a man whose authority could shake the very foundation of their careers. The black man, though bruised and winded, straightened himself. His dignity had not been beaten out of him. His voice, though cracked with pain, carried through the diner. "Is this how you treat every black man who dares to eat in peace, or is it just me today?" His words hung heavy. Some customers lowered their heads in shame. Others looked away, afraid to speak, but the silence made the officers shift uncomfortably. Still, arrogance kept them from backing down. One officer sneered, "You talk too much. Maybe you should learn to keep quiet before things get worse." It was at that moment, the very moment when the last shred of respect seemed stolen, that the door of the diner creaked open. And in walked his son. Dressed in plain clothes, he looked like an ordinary young man. But there was something about his stance, the sharpness of his gaze, the quiet authority in the way he carried himself. He hadn't spoken a word, yet the entire diner seemed to sense a shift. The officers, oblivious to the storm they had just summoned, continued their mockery. But soon, very soon, they would realize, and when they did, the entire diner would never forget what followed. The young man froze for a moment at the doorway, his eyes scanning the scene. His father, bruised, his clothes rumpled from the officer's grip, sat half-slumped against the counter-stool. Around him, the silence of witnesses hung thick in the air. Something in the son's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, calmly, deliberately, his shoes clicking against the diner's worn floor. Each step made the officers glance his way, irritation flashing across their faces. "Can we help you?" one of them barked, still gripping his father's arm. The son didn't answer immediately. He stopped just a few feet away, his piercing gaze locking on the officer's hand. Slowly, methodically, he spoke. "Let go of him," the officer scoffed. "And who exactly are you to give orders in my city?" The diner grew even quieter, the tension so sharp it could cut glass. The young man reached into his jacket pocket. For a brief, electric moment, everyone's breath caught. Was he pulling out a weapon? No. He produced a black leather wallet. He flipped it open with one practiced motion, revealing the golden shield and photo ID. The words above the emblem seemed to burn brighter under the diner's buzzing lights. United States Secret Service. The room erupted in gasps. The officers froze, their arrogance draining from their faces like blood down a drain. Their grip on the black man's arm loosened instantly. One stammered, "Secret Service?" The son's voice dropped, low and cutting. "Yes, and you've just assaulted the father of a federal officer." The father looked up at his son with pride and sorrow, his eyes saying what his lips could not. And the entire diner now waited, terrified, breathless, for what the Secret Service officer would do next. The silence after those words was unlike anything the diner had ever felt. Not even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to dare interrupt the moment. Every set of eyes, customers, staff, and even the cooks in the back, were glued to the young man who had just revealed his identity. The officers' mouths twitched, their hands hovering awkwardly in the air, as if unsure whether to let go completely or try to cover up what they had just done. One of them cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Look, there must be some misunderstanding here," he stammered. His voice, which had carried arrogance just moments earlier, now cracked like glass under pressure. The young man didn't flinch. He stepped closer, towering over them despite his calm presence. His father, still bruised and shaken, tried to speak. "Son, please, it's not worth—" But the son raised a hand gently, without looking at him. "No, Dad, it is worth it." His eyes shifted back to the officers. You humiliated him. You dragged a law-abiding man across the floor like he was nothing, and you did it in front of all these people, without reason. Do you know how many witnesses just watched you break the very oath you swore to uphold?" The words cut through the diner like a blade. A woman sitting at a nearby booth whispered to her friend, "He's right. They didn't even ask questions." Others nodded in agreement. For the first time, the tide of power in the room was shifting away from the uniforms. One officer shuffled his feet, looking toward the door as if escape might undo what had just happened. His partner, however, tried one last time to assert himself. "You think you can walk in here and lecture us? Badge or not, this is—" But before he could finish, the young man's voice rose, deep and commanding, filled with authority that left no room for argument. "Quiet." The diner went still again. The officer's words died in his throat. "You don't understand who's watching right now," the son continued, lowering his tone but keeping it sharp. He pointed around the room. "Every single person here saw the truth. They saw you abuse your power. They saw you cross the line. And trust me, when I report this, their testimonies will follow." The father looked down at his trembling hands. His son's strength filled him with both pride and shame. Pride because his child had become someone powerful, unafraid to speak truth to authority. Shame because deep inside, he wondered if this confrontation would endanger his boy. The older man opened his mouth again. "Son, please, don't make this bigger than it has to be." His voice cracked with fear. But then came the moment that made the father's heart stop cold. The young man turned toward the officers, took a slow step closer, and said with chilling clarity, "You two aren't leaving this diner, not until I decide what happens next." Gasps filled the room. A glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the floor. The officers stiffened, unsure if they should reach for their radios, their weapons, or simply beg for forgiveness. And at that very moment, the diner's door swung open again. A tall man in a sharp gray suit walked in, briefcase in hand, his eyes immediately catching the tense standoff. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a diner regular. He carried himself with a different kind of authority, quiet but commanding. And when his eyes landed on the young Secret Service officer, something flickered. Recognition. But who was he? And why did it feel like his arrival changed everything? The man in the gray suit paused at the doorway, taking in the tense scene before him, the bruised father on the counter stool, the officers frozen mid-motion, and the young Secret Service agent standing tall, his badge still glinting under the buzzing lights. The diner's chatter had vanished into silence. Forks had stopped midway to mouths. Even the smell of coffee and fried bacon seemed to disappear in the wait of that moment. The suited man adjusted his tie, his gaze sharp and unreadable. He moved forward slowly, each step deliberate, as though measuring every inch of the room. His shoes clicked against the linoleum floor, the sound echoing louder than it should. The officers shifted uncomfortably. One muttered, "Who the hell is this now?" under his breath. The young agent noticed the flicker of recognition in the man's eyes. He narrowed his gaze. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice steady but cautious. The suited man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stopped a few feet from the group, set his briefcase gently on an empty table, and finally spoke. "That depends," he said smoothly, his voice calm yet commanding. "Do you still go by Agent Carter, or have you adopted a new name since your last assignment?" The diner collectively gasped. Heads turned from the father to the son, whispers racing like wildfire. The young agent's jaw tightened. His father blinked, utterly lost. "What's he talking about? What assignment? Son, what's going on here?" But Carter didn't take his eyes off the stranger. "Who are you?" he demanded. The suited man gave a small, knowing smile. "Someone who knows exactly what you've done, and what you've sacrificed to keep certain secrets buried." The tension doubled. The officers looked back and forth, unsure if they should stay silent or call for backup. The father sat frozen, his heart pounding, unable to piece together what this new arrival meant. Carter clenched his fists, his calm starting to crack. He took one step forward, lowering his voice but filling it with steel. "You don't belong here. Say what you came to say, or leave." But the suited man only leaned closer, his eyes locking with Carter's, and then he whispered just loud enough for the father and the officers to hear, "The diner isn't the only place being watched tonight." At that, a chill swept through the entire room. Even the fluorescent lights above flickered as though the building itself shivered. The father's throat went dry. He gripped the counter for balance, looking at his son. "Carter, what does he mean?" And before Carter could answer, the man in the suit reached into his pocket. Every muscle in the diner tensed. Hands twitched toward weapons, breath caught in lungs, and eyes widened in fear. Then, he slowly pulled out a sleek, black envelope. He laid it flat on the counter in front of the father, his eyes never leaving Carter's. The envelope had no markings, no name, just a faint seal pressed into the paper. And that seal made Carter's blood run cold. The black envelope sat on the counter like a shadow that refused to move. Every eye in the diner was locked on it, but no one dared touch it. The silence was suffocating. The father stared at it with trembling hands. Why give this to me?" he whispered. The man in the gray suit tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into the faintest trace of a smile. "Because sometimes the answers lie with those who were never meant to know the questions." The father blinked, confused. His gaze shifted to his son. "Carter, what's going on? Why is this man talking like he knows something about you?" Carter's jaw clenched. His voice was sharp, protective. "Dad, don't touch it." But the older man's curiosity was stronger than his fear. His fingers hovered inches above the envelope, his heart pounding in his chest. The texture of the black paper seemed to draw him in, as if it carried weight beyond its size. "Sir," one of the officers finally spoke, his voice shaky, "is this evidence? Is this some kind of setup?" The suited man chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Evidence? No. This is far beyond your pay grade." He then leaned closer to the father, lowering his voice so only a few could hear, but the words carried enough that the diner strained to catch them. "Inside that envelope is proof. Proof that your son is not just who he says he is, but something far more dangerous. Something you were never supposed to discover." The father's breath caught. His hand froze above the envelope. His mind raced with questions, colliding into one another until he couldn't separate fear from doubt. He turned to his son, his voice breaking. "Carter, tell me he's lying. Tell me this isn't true." But Carter's silence was louder than words. The father's hand finally touched the envelope. The diner gasped, as if everyone felt the gravity of that single decision. He slid a finger under the flap, ready to tear it open, and then the door burst open again. This time it wasn't one man. It was three, all in dark suits, all wearing earpieces, their eyes sweeping the room with precision. The atmosphere shifted instantly, from tense to electric. These weren't random strangers. They moved like a unit, trained, prepared, unstoppable. The man in the gray suit smiled faintly. Right on time, one of the newcomers stepped forward, his gaze locking on Carter. "Agent Carter, you were instructed to keep a low profile, but instead, you've drawn every eye in this diner." The father gripped the envelope tighter, panic setting in. "Wait! Who are they? What is happening to my son?" But before anyone could answer, one of the suited newcomers pointed directly at the father's hand. His voice was sharp, commanding, "Don't open it." The diner erupted in gasps again, and the father now sat frozen, the envelope halfway torn, the entire diner waiting to see whether he would defy the order or obey. The father's hands trembled as he held the black envelope, the flap already bent from his attempt to tear it open. His mind screamed with questions that wouldn't let him rest until he knew the truth. Carter's voice cut through the silence, urgent, almost desperate. "Dad, listen to me. Don't do it. You don't understand what's at stake." But the father's eyes, filled with years of sacrifice, pain, and love for the boy he raised, stared back at him. "No, Carter. I don't understand. And I'm tired of being the one left in the dark. I raised you. I carried you through nights when we had nothing but a half-empty fridge and faith that tomorrow would be better. And now you're keeping secrets. Secrets that could destroy us. I need to know." The three agents in dark suits exchanged sharp glances, their body language like wolves ready to pounce. One of them stepped forward, his tone cutting. "Sir, I'm ordering you to put the envelope down. For your safety." The father shook his head slowly, a tear brimming in his eye. "For my safety, or for your control?" The diner, though silent, seemed to thrum with energy. People leaned forward, eyes wide, breaths shallow. They weren't just watching a family dispute. They were watching the unraveling of something much bigger, and then, with a sudden rip, the father tore open the envelope. The sound was deafening in the quiet diner. Paper tore, the flap split wide. The agents lunged forward, but it was too late. He had already pulled the documents halfway out. Everyone strained to see what was inside. The father unfolded the first sheet. His eyes scanned the page. His face drained of color. His lips quivered. "What? What is this?" His voice cracked, weak, trembling. The page bore his son's name, Agent Carter. But below it, words leapt out like daggers. "Classified assignment. Deep cover. Operation Nightfall." The father blinked, unable to process. "Deep cover?" He turned to his son, his voice breaking. "Carter, are you even my son?" The diner gasped, the weight of the question shaking every corner of the room. Carter's fists clenched at his sides, his eyes blazing. "Dad, don't say that. You know me." But the man in the gray suit spoke again, his tone like poison in the air. "Do you? Or have you only known what they wanted you to see?" The father's breath hitched. He stared at Carter, searching for the boy he raised, the boy who laughed, who cried, who carried hope in his smile. But doubt crept in, cold and sharp. Before he could speak again, the agents who had entered last moved closer, their hands slipping inside their jackets. The entire diner tensed. The father gripped the torn envelope tighter. His voice rose, filled with equal parts fear and fury. "If someone doesn't tell me the truth right now, then I swear." But before he could finish, the diner's lights flickered. Once, twice, then went completely dark. Screams erupted in the sudden blackness. Chairs scraped, dishes crashed. The sound of heavy boots pounded the floor. And then, one gunshot split the night. The darkness was absolute, the kind that made even the bravest heart stumble. The diner, once filled with nervous whispers and gasps, now rang with chaos. Shouts, overturned chairs, glass shattering on the floor. The father's ears rang from the single gunshot. His pulse thundered in his chest. He clutched the torn envelope to his chest, like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. "Carter!" he screamed into the darkness, his voice cracked, raw and frantic. "Where are you?" No answer. The silence after the gunshot was worse than the shot itself. His mind raced. Had his son been hit? Was he lying on the ground, bleeding out in the blackness? Another sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps, cutting through the chaos. The man in the gray suit. His voice floated through the void, calm and cruel. "Now you see, don't you? Truth is always heavier than lies. And sometimes it kills." The father spun in the direction of the voice, his breath ragged. "What did you do to my son?" But the man didn't answer directly. Instead, he chuckled softly, like someone amused at a private joke. And then, faintly, the father heard a voice he knew too well. His son's. Carter, low, strained, but alive. "Dad, stay down." The words were enough to flood him with both relief and terror. Relief that Carter was alive. terror at the realization that his son was now in the middle of something far deadlier than either of them had imagined. The agents barked orders into the dark, their footsteps heavy, purposeful. "Secure the perimeter! No one leaves!" Suddenly, power snapped back on. The lights flooded the diner, and the scene before them was chaos incarnate. One of the suited agents was sprawled on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. His gun lay just inches from his lifeless hand. The other two stood frozen, their weapons drawn but their eyes darting, confused, enraged. The man in the gray suit stood untouched, his smile wider now. He glanced at the father, then at Carter, as if savoring the confusion he had sown. But Carter was on one knee behind an overturned booth, his own weapon drawn, his chest rising and falling in quick, heavy breaths. His eyes locked on his father, a mixture of desperation and warning. "Dad," he said firmly, his voice shaking with urgency, "you need to trust me now more than ever. Don't move. Don't listen to him. Just stay with me." The father stared back, torn between the blood on the floor, the mysterious smile of the gray-suited man, and the trembling conviction in his son's eyes. And then, before he could respond, the front windows of the diner shattered inward. Glass exploded across the floor as dark figures in tactical gear stormed the room, their rifles raised, their voices booming in unison. "Federal raid! Everyone on the ground!" The diner erupted into screams again, and the father was now trapped in the center of a storm he didn't understand, clutching an envelope of secrets he was never supposed to touch, as heavily armed strangers closed in from every side. The father dropped flat to the ground as the tactical team poured into the diner like a flood. Their boots pounded against tile, their rifles sweeping across every face, every body. The air crackled with shouts, orders, demands, threats. "Hands where we can see them! Down! Everyone down! Do not move!" Patrons screamed and scrambled under tables. Dishes shattered, coffee spilled into dark puddles across the counter. The father pressed his face to the cold floor, clutching the torn envelope tight to his chest as if it could shield him from the chaos. But Carter didn't move. He crouched low, his gun still drawn, his eyes flicking between the new armed intruders and the man in the gray suit, who stood motionless, smiling like a king surveying his chessboard. "Agent Carter," one of the raiders barked, stepping closer, rifle aimed directly at him. "By order of command, stand down. Drop your weapon." The father's breath caught. Command? They weren't here to raid everyone. They were here for his son. Carter didn't drop his weapon. His voice was iron. "Not until I know who you're working for." The team leader snarled. "That's not your call. Stand down or we put you down." The father's eyes darted between them, his heart breaking. His son, his boy, was now surrounded by at least a dozen men in tactical gear, rifles raised, fingers twitching on triggers. One wrong move, one wrong word, and this would end in blood. "Carter," the father whispered, voice shaking, "please, don't fight them. Please, son." For a second, Carter's eyes softened. He looked at his father, the man who raised him with nothing but love and sacrifice. His lips parted, as if to say something reassuring. But then, the gray-suited man spoke, his voice slicing through the tension like a blade. "Do you really think they came here to arrest him?" Every head turned. The man's grin widened. "No. They came here to erase him, and anyone who knows the truth." The father's heart lurched. His grip on the envelope tightened until his knuckles whitened. The tactical team leader's eyes flickered with something dangerous. His voice, lower this time, more controlled. "Last chance, Carter. Surrender, now." Carter's jaw clenched. His weapon didn't lower. And then, before anyone could react, one of the tactical men lunged forward, grabbing the father by the collar and yanking him up off the floor. The diner gasped. The father cried out, the envelope slipping from his grasp and fluttering to the ground. Carter's eyes blazed. "Let him go!" But the rifle's barrel was pressed to the father's temple now. The team leader's voice was cold, merciless. "Drop your weapon, Agent Carter, or your father dies." The father froze, his body shaking, the cold steel biting into his skin. His eyes locked with his son's, and Carter, torn between duty and blood, raised his weapon slightly higher instead of lowering it. His voice thundered across the room. "No one touches my father." The room was seconds away from exploding, and then another gunshot rang out, but this time it wasn't Carter who pulled the trigger. The crack of the gunshot tore through the diner like a lightning strike. For one agonizing heartbeat, no one moved. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. Then came the gasp. One of the tactical agents, not the one holding the father hostage, jerked backward, blood blooming across his shoulder. He crumpled to the ground, groaning in pain, his rifle clattering beside him. The room spun into chaos. Shouts erupted. "Sniper! Where's the shot from? Find the angle!" The windows, already shattered from the raid, gave no clue. The night beyond the diner was dark, unforgiving. Somewhere out there, unseen eyes had picked their mark. The father's knees buckled, his chest heaving. The rifle at his temple pressed harder, the trembling agent behind him now panicking. "Don't move! Nobody moves or he's dead!" Carter's weapon stayed locked on the man holding his father. His voice boomed across the chaos, steady and sharp. "Listen to me. That shot wasn't mine, which means you've got enemies out there too. You shoot him, and you'll never make it out alive." The man's grip wavered. Sweat poured down his temple. His finger hovered on the trigger, torn between fear and fury. And through it all, the man in the gray suit remained perfectly still. Not a flinch, not a blink. Just that same maddening smile. "Looks like someone doesn't want the truth buried after all," he said softly, his words dripping with amusement. Carter growled, eyes narrowing. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" The man tilted his head. "I didn't need to know. I only needed to wait. The truth always has a way of breaking in." Another gunshot shattered the air. This one blew out the neon diner sign above the door, showering sparks into the room. Patrons screamed and ducked for cover. The agents scrambled, shouting commands into their radios. "Request backup! Unknown shooter outside! Lock down this perimeter! Now!" In the chaos, Carter's eyes locked with his father's. For the first time tonight, his voice broke, not with command, but with raw emotion. "Dad, trust me. When I move, you move, no hesitation." The father's lips trembled, his body shook, his heart pounding against the cold barrel at his head. But he nodded, just once. The next second, Carter's finger tightened on the trigger, and before he could fire, the diner's back door slammed open. A woman burst inside, dressed in dark tactical gear, a rifle strapped across her chest, her face hidden beneath a visor. She moved with the same precision as the men already in the room, but the insignia on her uniform was different, not theirs. She raised her weapon, voice cutting like thunder. "Step away from him. Now." The man in the gray suit finally smiled wider, his eyes gleaming like a predator's. "And there she is." The father's heart dropped into his stomach. Who was she, and why? Did she seem to know Carter? The diner had turned into a stage, and every eye was fixed on the unfolding drama. The officers who just minutes earlier barked orders and hurled insults were now reduced to stiff, trembling figures. Their earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced with wide-eyed panic. The son, his Secret Service badge still glinting under the harsh diner lights, stood tall, unflinching. His voice carried an authority that cut through the air like a blade. "You put your hands on the wrong man tonight." He gestured at his father, still seated but now holding his head higher, strength slowly returning to his frame. "This man you treated like a criminal is a decorated war veteran, my father, the man who raised me with honor, discipline, and integrity." The room erupted in hushed murmurs. Patrons who had sat frozen now leaned forward, their anger simmering in whispers. A young woman at a booth muttered, "A veteran? They didn't even ask. They just—" Her voice broke with disgust. The officers exchanged nervous glances. One tried to recover, stammering, "Look, we didn't know who he was." The son cut him off sharply. "You didn't care who he was, that's the problem." The words landed heavy, echoing like thunder. The father finally spoke, his voice cracked but steady. "This is nothing new, son. I've worn a uniform for this country, fought under its flag, and still, men like these see nothing but my skin." The diner fell completely silent. The truth in his words hung over everyone, undeniable. The son's eyes darkened. He reached into his jacket again, pulling out a sleek phone. He held it up, showing the recording screen. Active since the moment he entered. Every insult, every shove, every degrading command. Captured. "You'll explain this," he said coldly, "to internal affairs, to the chief, and to the entire nation if I choose to release it." The officers went pale. Their arrogance had been dismantled piece by piece, leaving nothing but the weight of consequences looming over them. The father looked at his son with pride, his hand trembling as it rested on the counter. "You've become exactly what I prayed you would, a man who stands where I cannot." And yet, beneath the father's pride, a shadow lingered. For he knew exposing these officers could ignite something far bigger than this diner, something that might put both him and his son in danger. The question now hung over the room like a storm cloud. Would the son press forward, unleashing justice? Or would the price of truth prove too dangerous? The diner's silence was deafening. Every patron, every waitress holding her tray midair, every set of eyes, all fixed on the son with the glowing Secret Service badge in his hand. The officers, once so loud and domineering, now stood like schoolboys caught stealing. Sweat rolled down the forehead of the taller one. His voice cracked as he tried to salvage what little pride he had left. "Listen, kid, let's not blow this out of proportion. We were just doing our job. A misunderstanding, that's all." The son's lips curled into the faintest smirk. His voice remained calm, but each word dripped with iron authority. "Doing your job? Your job is to serve and protect, not humiliate, assault, and degrade a man who did nothing but order a meal. Don't insult me by calling that a misunderstanding." The smaller officer swallowed hard, stepping forward with shaky hands raised in surrender. "Please, just delete the video. We've got families, kids. You don't want to ruin lives over this." The son's eyes narrowed. He glanced at his father, then back at the trembling officers. "You're worried about your families? My father worried about his every day when he went to war, risking his life for a country that still treats him like this." A gasp came from the back of the diner. The old man with the cane, who had been silent all night, suddenly raised his voice. "Don't you dare let them off easy, son. I've seen this too many times. If you stay quiet, they'll keep doing it to the next man, and the next after that." Heads around the diner nodded. The room had shifted. Patrons who once watched in fear were now emboldened, united by outrage. The taller officer's bravado cracked completely. His knees bent slightly, as though the weight of his own actions was crushing him. "Please," he whispered hoarsely, don't end our careers. We can't come back from this." The son let the silence stretch, savoring the moment where power had finally flipped. His father's trembling hand gripped his wrist. The older man whispered so low only he could hear, "Son, justice is one thing, revenge is another. Don't let their hatred turn you into them." The son's jaw tightened. He stared at the phone in his hand, the recording still running. The power to destroy these men, or to walk away, rested solely with him. The diner waited, breathless, to see what choice he would make. The phone in the son's hand felt heavier than ever before. His thumb hovered over the screen, just one tap away from sending the video to every news outlet, every civil rights attorney, every social media platform that could light the world on fire in minutes. The taller officer's breathing was ragged. His partner's eyes darted to the door like a cornered animal looking for an escape. The pressure was crushing them, and yet all the power sat in the palm of one man's hand. "Do it!" a voice cried from the back. It was the waitress, her hands trembling as she clutched a coffee pot. "Post it! Show the world what they do to us!" "Yes!" another man shouted from a booth. "We're tired of this! They never pay unless they're forced to!" The diner was no longer quiet. It had become a courtroom, a chorus of anger demanding justice, and at the center the son stood as judge and jury. His father tugged weakly at his sleeve, his voice breaking. "Son, I taught you to fight, yes, but also to forgive. Don't lose yourself in their hatred." The young man's jaw clenched. His father's words clashed with the roaring voices around him. Forgiveness or justice? Mercy or fire? Then, just as the son's thumb began to press down on the screen, the diner door creaked open. A new figure stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark gray suit that looked like it cost more than everything else in the diner combined. His presence silenced the room instantly. The man's cold eyes swept across the scene, the father bruised, the officers pale and sweating, the son holding the badge and phone like a weapon. Slowly he walked forward, his leather shoes tapping softly against the linoleum. Every cop in the room stiffened, because this wasn't just any man. The diner had no idea yet, but they were now in the presence of one of the most powerful men in the city, the CEO whose table sat just a few feet away from the chaos, and the look on his face promised that everything was about to change. The diner froze as the man in the gray suit stepped further inside, the hum of his presence swallowing every whisper. His stride was slow, deliberate, and his sharp eyes took in every detail: the bruises on the father's arm, the officer's trembling hands, the glowing Secret Service badge in the son's grip. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood there, hands clasped behind his back, his polished shoes gleaming under the weak diner lights. It was as though time itself bowed to him, forcing everyone to wait for his verdict. The taller officer's face drained of color. He took half a step back, muttering under his breath, "Oh no, not him." The son caught the movement. His eyes narrowed. He turned slightly toward the man in the suit, suspicion flashing across his face. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with warning. Finally the man spoke. His tone was low, even, but carried a weight that crushed the room. "Who I am is not your concern right now, but I will say this: what I've just witnessed is disgraceful." The words sliced the silence clean open. Patrons shifted, their eyes darting between the young man and this newcomer, who seemed to command the air itself. The shorter officer stammered nervously, "Sir, it was just a misunderstanding." The CEO's gaze snapped to him, and the officer's words died instantly in his throat. "A misunderstanding?" the man repeated slowly, his jaw tightening. "I've built my company on one principle: accountability. I don't tolerate lies from my employees, and I certainly won't tolerate it from those entrusted to uphold the law." The son's eyes sharpened, suspicion deepening. Why was this stranger defending them? And why did the officers look as though they'd rather face a firing squad than this man in the suit? The father, weary but watching closely, whispered to his son, "Careful. Men like him don't walk into diners without a reason." The son's grip on the phone tightened. He still had the power to expose the officers with one click, but now a new player had entered the game, one whose intentions were cloaked, unreadable. The CEO stepped closer to the counter, his shadow stretching long across the diner floor. His eyes locked onto the young man's, unblinking, calculating. Then he said, in a voice that sent chills down every spine in the room, "You're standing at a crossroads. What you decide in the next 60 seconds will not only change their lives," he pointed briefly at the officers, "but yours and your father's." The diner went deathly still. The ticking clock above the counter sounded louder than ever. The CEO's challenge hung in the air like a blade, and the son hadn't yet decided which path he would take.